welcome to Wits University, a beautiful space. I'm glad that you all could make some time to come out and meet with us midweek and to brave the Braamfontein traffic to be here. My name is Dinesh Balia. I'm a lecturer at Wits Journalism, the school that is hosting you this evening in conjunction with ASRI. I'm wearing two hats this evening. One is that of the Wits School of Journalism and also that of the Deputy Public Advocate on the South African Press Council, an institution that I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit more this evening. I think it's fitting that a discussion of this nature is taking place in a space where journalism is taught, for it is in teaching that we learn, and it is through this kind of debate that we unlearn new ideas. We're here to publicly debate what is wrong with public debate in South Africa, but more than that, we're here to talk about the media's complicity in this problem. You will hear from the very famous Marius Roodt, who has not joined us as Shelley Garland this evening. He tells me that he prefers Marius tonight. And he will talk a little bit about his piece on the disenfranchisement of white men, which found its way to the Huffington Post. And it's this Huffington Post experience which gives us the chance to reflect on how public debate in this country lacks nuance and is sometimes swept up in a sea of rhetoric echoed by the like-minded. The debate in this regard will be extensive, and I'm very, very grateful that both Karima Brown and Angelo Fick are here to lend their perspectives. But let me just say this from my perspective. The Huffington Post incident, which saw the resignation of its editor, exposed a deeply divided media in this country. Even journalists themselves did not shy away from the vitriol typical of your standard Twitter troll. It was a situation which showed how little we have in common with each other at times, and how we are loath to debate and discuss and find solutions that are very common to very many of our newsrooms. Tom Eaton, who called the HuffPost incident a new low for South African journalism, wrote that when people no longer believe in what they read, journalism loses its ability to shine a light in dark places. And when that happens, we are all in deep trouble. And I repeat, we are all in deep trouble. It is clear then that we have a collective and shared responsibility to produce journalism that holds power to account and has the ability to rise above the noise and distraction of terms such as fake news and alternative facts. It is in doing this, and only in doing this, that we will strengthen the future of journalism in this country. My thanks on behalf of Wits Journalism to ASRI and all the team that have managed to pull this wonderful event together, and a special thanks to all our panelists who, as I said, came out in the Braamfontein traffic to be with us tonight and for their contributions. It is now my honor to introduce our chair for the evening, my very smartly dressed friend and colleague, Ibrahim Fakir. Ibrahim, you may have noticed, is a straight-talking and fiercely independent political analyst who appears regularly in the mainstream media to provide comment and analysis. Ibrahim is an ASRI Programs Director providing strategic leadership to the ASRI Future Leaders Fellowship Program, and I'm told that many of the fellows are here tonight, as well as the Township's Economy, Public Policy and Legislative Advocacy Programs. He will be directing us, and hopefully you will engage with us after the panelists have spoken. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for that very kind introduction, Dinesh. It might be a little misleading because you're now going to think that I'm complicit in this fabrication of news and alternative facts, considering that you think I appear as often as I do in the media. I assure you I appear much less than many of my colleagues, mostly because I have a day job, and that day job is at ASRI as the programs director. And so I want to welcome you all again here this evening. Thank you very much for coming, for braving the traffic, as Dinesh said. And thanks to Wits Journalism for so readily agreeing to partner with us in hosting this event. We didn't think that there would have been another natural partner, and obviously that would be the one, the place which teaches journalism. But also, it's a natural fit because most of the staff at ASRI happen to be former Wits students or Wits alumni. So thanks very much again. I must just say by way of introduction that this is not the first event that we're having on the nature of public debate in South Africa today. It is in fact the second in what would hopefully be a series of 4 or 5. We're still planning around that, but we do have a future event planned with a slightly different topic and a slightly different focus, although it remains faithful to the theme of what is the problem with public debate in South Africa today. The first, as all of you might have received on the invitation, was delivered by Aubrey Machitri, and there is a video recording of that. Hopefully, what we hope to do at the end of this process of 4 or 5 events and activities is actually to document and bring out a short report on the nature of public debate in South Africa today. Now, why would we want to do this? There's fairly obvious reasons why this is the case. You have a governing party which is heading into both a policy conference and an elective conference, which is split down the middle. So its own protagonists inside the party are beginning to propagate false news, alternative facts, fake news, and so forth. And debates about radical economic transformation and about what's going on inside the governing party falls squarely within this frame. But it's not just the governing party which also provides alternative information. Remember that there are 4 what we appropriately call minority governments in the big metropolitan areas of the country, which are made up, as some of you popularly call it, through coalition governments. But they aren't strictly speaking coalition governments. But heading into the 2019 election, they also have it in their interest to spread a degree of propaganda which they will pretend to be facts, analysis, and reality. So there's a third reason why we ought to be cautious about the kind of information that we receive and that we consume. But it's not just political parties who are embroiled in this. If you think about a government and events of the last 2 days in which a senior, I don't know whether to call him an operative or an executive officer, but someone called Brian Molefe had first resigned, then taken leave, then I have no idea, then you know, who knows what he did. So it's not just political parties who are embroiled in this. It is an entire government which is itself implicated in the way in which it spreads false news, false information, and so forth. So there's very good reason why this is the case and why we're actually having this debate. It's not just about the media. So for those who think we want to single out our colleagues and friends in the media, it is not about that simply. It is about covering the entire gamut. We obviously did provide a framework which you would have received in your invitation. That invitation and that framework is not the only things we expect our panelists to reflect on. So for those of you on the panel who think that you need a prepared speech, trust me, you don't. It's meant to be a free-flowing conversation, and hopefully our participants in the audience will contribute to it. So with that, few words, let me ask the panelists to come up. But before that, I want to say that we did try very extensively to get more panelists. For example, we invited people from News 24 who were the owners of Huffington Post. Unfortunately, none of them could make it. They politely declined. We invited the editor of City Press. They unfortunately couldn't make it either. We invited Dinesh's colleagues on the Press Council. Unfortunately, they had another event this afternoon in Cape Town, so they had a good excuse not to come. We did invite one other panelist, and I'm not going to tell you who that is. I will leave it up to you to guess who that panelist might have been. But this is the response we got from the panelists, amongst other things. The first was a question about why we invited Marius Roodt. Because according to this person, he or she, Marius, I'm not sure which you are today, shouldn't really have anything to add to this debate. On the contrary, obviously, we believe differently. He is the key protagonist, and so it's appropriate that we do hear from him. The other person we invited was someone who's also been reflecting quite a bit on the nature of public debate, who now happens to be a DA MP. And so this person had a problem with us inviting a DA MP too, asking us what they have to contribute to the topic of the nature of public debate and reflections on the media. Amongst other things, they also said that we're not talking enough about structural constraints in newsrooms and why things like the Huffington Hoax could have been propagated. But of course, all of those responses are blind to the fact that when the Huffington Hoax was propagated, it was actually circulated to 3 or 4 other media outlets. None of them took up the bait. The second that it refuses to engage with is the fact that Huffington Post, or its former editor, had actually written a piece in support of it, calling it pretty standard in feminist theory. And I used pretty standard in inverted commas. They then went on to celebrate the huge number of online traffic that they generated to their site. And then subsequently pulled all of the material related to this. So this is the grounds on which the 4th panelist refused to attend the event. You make of it what you will, but allow the first protagonist, Marius Roodt, who's a researcher, a former journalist, and also a part-time cross-dresser, to address us first. Thanks, Marius.
Good evening. Thanks, everyone, for that introduction. Don't cross-dress that often, just put that on the record. So, why I set out to do this, I really didn't think it would obviously get as big as it did. And I really didn't, the aim of it wasn't to target Varashni or target the Huffington Post. As Ibrahim pointed out, was sent to 3 other organizations, and none of whom picked it up or decided to run with it. But my issue was, I was looking, it felt to me that there was a lack of editorial discernment in South African media. There was lots of, you can almost say fake news being put out there. Things about ownership statistics of land in South Africa, ownership statistics of the JSE, which are debates we can have and we should have, but a lot of the facts that come out are straight out falsehoods. I saw something actually in the Daily Maverick saying that 90% of land is owned by whites in South Africa, which is completely wrong. Whites may own a higher proportion of land in South Africa than other population groups possibly, but saying 90% is incorrect and shouldn't be something that gets put onto mainstream media, for example. So what happened was that my piece showed up, I think, a lack of editorial discernment, possibly not in all media, obviously, but certainly at the Huffington Post, and an echo chamber that exists, and not just on the left, and bias that exists in our media. I need to say that this echo chamber that exists is, as I say, not restricted to the left. If you look at, for example, a website like Politics Web, which I think in its articles is fairly balanced, but its comment section is definitely an echo chamber. There are a couple of dissenting voices, but by and large, it's people agreeing on a certain point of view. And we can just imagine what a comment section of a website like Breitbart would be, for example. But with regard to bias, I have to say bias isn't obviously something we want, but it's unavoidable. And in South Africa, I think we'd be better served if media organizations came out clearly where they stand on the political spectrum or if they support a certain political party. For example, in the United Kingdom, newspapers are very clear about who they support or where they sit on the ideological spectrum. And it's not a problem there, and I don't think it should be a problem here. But obviously we do operate in a different environment, which I suppose has to be taken into account. I think also what this whole Huffington Post debacle showed is the problems with the Huffington Post model, where they rely heavily on unpaid contributors. And I think this also reflects on, generally with media, needing to get circulations up, increase clicks and so on, which I think is obviously one of the main reasons this actually happened, I think. So I think this also possibly, what happened at Huffington Post could be linked to the juniorization of newsrooms. Sub-editing is poor on a lot of our websites and so on, spelling errors in headlines, all that kind of thing, which I think is a kind of a broken Windows theory maybe. You could say, if sub-editors aren't picking up spelling errors, how is that filtering? Is that filtering down? Is it filtering up? If spelling errors are something that's happening, what is the level of editorial discernment happening? And I must ask, if Ferrell Haffajee or Mondli Makanya or Peter Bruce were the editor of Huffington Post, would this entire thing have happened? I'm not so sure. This was also aimed at, in a way, opening up the debates around the place of white people in South Africa. And I think debates around decolonization are very necessary, and they're ones that we have to have. but at the same time, it's not useful to tell people whose families have been here for 3 or even close to 400 years that they're colonizers or don't belong here. But at the same time, whites also do need to do a bit of introspection about our place in society and where we're going. And then 2 final points. This showed me that patriarchy is actually alive and well, because before it came out that it was me and Shelley Garland was still the protagonist in this tale, the amount of vitriol about her appearance and her weight that was put onto social media was actually alarming. People would make comments saying no wonder she hates men because she can't get a boyfriend, all this kind of thing. Then when it came out that it was me, I mean, I obviously had my detractors on social media, but there was nothing said about my weight or about my appearance or anything like that, which I think does reflect on how men and women are treated differently in society, which is something I didn't think about before this whole issue, but it came out now where this happened. And finally, in my opinion, I'm not sure this was hate speech. I mean, it was definitely against the Constitution, and it should definitely never have been published, but I don't think it was hate speech. And I think, I'm not a lawyer, and I think there's probably people who are cleverer than me who would have stronger opinions on it. So, yeah, that's my piece. Thanks.
Well, Angelo thinks I shouldn't introduce him because he's so well known. But
that's an alternative fact, by the way.
But Angelo's not a former academic, still an academic, just not at an academic institution, a researcher, and currently serves as a researcher and commentator at E-News Channel Africa. So he's got broader reflections around these issues before we come to Karima Brown, who I'll introduce before she takes to the podium. Angelo, over to you for 10 minutes.
Okay. So obviously, thanks for that introduction, Ibrahim. I come to this, and I'll give you a brief sort of history of how I come to the question. Having studied in the humanities and reskilled, taught in a school of journalism, but I never taught the practice of journalism, and then moved and retrained in feminist philosophy of science, so that I ended up teaching philosophy of science on this campus for 3 years. So this is a bit of the return of the repressed for me, and I'm not the repressed, this space is the repressed. So for me, the question of public debate in South Africa is clearly linked to the question of where ideas circulate. Because in a society, ideas circulate in very specific spaces, and there is the ideal of where ideas and conversations happen, and here we can go Habermas and that entire route. And then there is the materiality of where ideas actually circulate. In other words, where conversations really happen as opposed to where we imagine in a democratic society they should happen, and sometimes imagine and play as if they do happen only in those spaces. So, for me, there are a couple of spaces in which this happens. One of them is the media, and there is a public and a private domain in that space. There are universities and research organizations, there are political organizations, and then there are civil society and NGOs, and then there are all the other social institutions that make up any society, including family, churches, religious organizations, the gym, for want of a better space, where conversations can be very awkward, I am told. But if we go to these places, there is the ideal of each of these, right? There's the ideal of the university, which, as we found out in 2015 in South Africa, actually has almost no relationship to the material reality of universities. Universities are spaces of argument, as opposed to spaces where soldiers and paramilitary officials police people's behavior on campuses. The media, where we are told we have a public broadcaster in this country, but we all know that actually the functioning of that public broadcaster in terms of information is not at the ideal level that a public broadcaster should work. The private media operate in an economically constrained environment, and therefore their relationship to consumers is often very specifically geared around a curtailed economy in which public advertising spend is also in a particular direction, away from the big spenders, the state that owns much of the economy, and towards smaller spenders who then have very specific demands, whether they are subscribers, and that's not just television but also radio, and this sort of down spiraling of newspaper circulation in South Africa. Then there are the political organizations, and I won't say too much about that because Ibrahim has already gone there, and we're all familiar with the "I said it's true and therefore it is true" phenomenon in South African politics, where people will say something, then they will deny that they've ever said it, and when confronted with the evidence that they've said it, will basically tell you that you've imagined that they've said this. And this is not party politically specific, this happens across parties. I never tweeted it in that way. You go, well, what do the words on this tweet say? I never said that, I meant something else. You quoted me out of context. It's my second language, and if I were to speak my first language, you would hear what I really wanted to say. These are the kinds of things politicians say almost every day. Then there is this thing that people just take at face value often, which is the civil society or NGO space, where conversations are supposedly righteous, they're just in the interest of good, and the ideological impetus behind those conversations and the terms in which they're had are often opaque or deleted, or they're simply put in abeyance. But how do these relate to power in the specific political economy of post-millennial, post-apartheid South Africa? This is clearly a society in which the tensions of the 1990s that have not been resolved have come back with the return of the repressed. They've come back with a vengeance. They've come back with all sorts of violent eruptions into what was seen to be the ordered social fabric. And media organizations are not separate from that, partly because it isn't actually only about unfinished business, to use Terry Bell and Dumiza Nzebeza's phrase, from the past. It's actually also dynamics in the present, and this is where the phrase political economy is actually quite crucial. It's not just about fixing things that we didn't do in the past, it's also what is going on right now, because South Africa stands in a very particular relationship to a global economic order, where some parts of this particular society want to and quite happily fit in and suture themselves into that order, and other parts have been left out, and there is tension with the order as well as between those sections in this society. And that shapes the kinds of stories we tell about one another. It shapes the kinds of ideas that circulate in the society. And very often there is a return to very old ideas despite their toxicity because they're comfortable, they're predictable. So for example, in this society, one of the things that irks me very much is the endless return to the Population Registration Act 1950 categories, as if they describe human beings accurately. It's categorical thinking, and it's for me one of the flaws of post-apartheid thinking, this inability to not just uncouple and move beyond by transcending, but to uncouple in order to undo and to rethink and to begin to think creatively and more productively about the society that we live in and the society that we imagine we want to live in. And here I'm not particularly interested in regressive thinkers, so the clearly conservative thinkers who hark back to the past. I'm thinking here specifically of the people who call themselves progressives, or as I like to think of them, faux-gressives, people who speak progress but actually practice regress. Because if you continue to use the Population Registration Act 1950 to decide what the world looks like, you're making a fundamental error in scientific terms. To go back to Robert Miles, you're using race to make sense of the world instead of looking at how race is used to make sense of the world. Racism and race after race relations. The fact that in South Africa we still have an institute dedicated to this in its name, which now says it's merely a think tank about neoliberal economics, tells me that people don't seem to have a reliable relationship to language, its words, and how we use them. And that's another flaw that I see in South African public debate. Words don't mean what they mean in the disciplines out of which they come, or out of the traditions of philosophical thought in which they, cohere. Actually, they mean what I think they mean and what I tell you they mean in the moment in which I use them conveniently to mean what I want them to mean. That's been the approach in the South African space. And there I don't think it's just journalists. It's almost everybody in the society. So, for example, when we talk about whiteness, there is a debate about this that seems utterly, blankly ignored by many people. Do we mean whiteness in the sense that David Rudiger uses it, which is Peggy McIntosh? Scholars of critical race theory talk about how race is constructed through a set of social policies, rituals, behaviors, thoughts, habits, and reproduced in that way? Do we mean whiteness in representation via Richard Dyer, which is how it's figured in popular culture? Do we mean it in the sense in which J.M. Coetzee uses it in South Africa in terms of a cultural production, which is this notion of that which is no longer European but not yet African? Do we use it in the descriptive measures of people like Melissa Steyn, or even of somebody like Saul Dubo, who talks about the kind of production of knowledges and cultures, cultural product, by people who identify as white, are identified as white, and in their cultural and knowledge reproduction repeat this kind of construction of whiteness? Because if we did that, our take on whiteness in universities would be very different from the way it is right now. We will all have read The Commonwealth of Knowledge by Saul Duba, which traces the construction and reproduction of whiteness in South African knowledge production from 1820 to 2000. We would then have thought, what happens between 2000 and 2017? And our approach to the critique of colonial discourse and its perpetuation in our universities would be very different. The same goes for media and public discourse in media organizations. We would not ask the simplistic questions. Are the people in the newsroom a certain kind of user of sunblock? Do they wear certain kinds of clothes? And do they use toilets in particular ways? Because those tell you nothing about the construction of race, class, gender, sexuality, and the intersections, which is not my term for it, but the ways in which, as Spivak, which is the way I prefer to think of it, talks about the weaving together of different strands of discursive arrangements that give us the human identity, the subject that is engendered in social discourse. And it's for me the unwillingness to connect these things that is one of the pockmarks of the South African public space when it comes to debating. The relationship to reason and logic is often a very convenient and very tenuous relationship. It's applied when necessary, it's put in abeyance when inconvenient. So much of what is said is often not subjected to tests of reason and logic. One of the things I insisted that those engineering students I used to teach on this campus have to apply. Does it pass the Y regress? Are you actually explaining origins? And then if we're dealing with complex social phenomena, clearly we don't have simplistic explanations, but often we resort to simplistic causal explanations. It's because this is a white person. It is because these are working class people. It's because they have left opinions. Also, there's an understanding that human beings, once they tell you something, have revealed some kind of innate truth that they're fully in control of, as if 150 years of psychology in its current format haven't disproven the fact that when people speak, even as I speak now, what they say is somehow fully in their control, and they are self-knowing subjects who are somehow confessing a truth every time they open their mouths. And the last two things that I want to talk about briefly is that there are broader philosophical questions that we seem to be very lazy in South Africa to ask, because we're constantly resorting to the very quotidian questions of skills. So we ask questions about the juniorization of the people debating the issue, which means we can dismiss students who question the structures and the repertoires of university teaching because, well, you know, they don't have the skill to approach us. So we laugh at the questions they ask of us in public meetings because they're actually not discipline specialists, which is highly disrespectful, but that's not interesting, but actually goes against the very tenets of the disciplines in which the very people doing the laughing confront those who interrogate them. The point of university education is to create a set of questioners in the next generation who will undo all of the knowledge repertoires and the knowledge content of your generation. So laughing at these people is hardly furthering your duty as an intellectual. And the same goes on across all these other social institutions and arenas in which public debate is supposed to happen. And that paternalistic gesture is not new in South Africa. After all, it is what happened in 1976 between the parents and the children, the confrontation of legitimacy and authority. And lastly, the ignorance of the very science and social science that is not just outside the universities. I go to university seminars and I'm often appalled by people who don't seem to understand what it means to say that race is a social construct. It's not some sort of line that you get out of the way and then you move on with how you usually talk about people, as in the colored people and their culture, the Indian and its relationship to tuberculosis, or the black miner and, you know, same-sex hostels. And you go, what are these? These are not social constructions of race. You're using the very, very poison chalice of apartheid knowledge production in post-apartheid because you haven't unlearned the habits of the old and reschooled yourself in the habits of the new. The point of knowledge is not crowing some sort of triumph, which it can become in this country, but actually to ask ourselves difficult questions, which include questions of complicity with the order and implication in the order, even if we are not complicit with it. And far too often people step aside from their complicity and never examine their implication, because it's easy to step aside from whiteness, from colonialism, from gender violence, from masculinity, from class privileges. If you say that these are things that are untenable and unpalatable, but you do very little else to undo them in your everyday life, much less in those very arguments that you make in public spaces around those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelo. Thanks for that. And I think what we want to do now is try and take this sort of global view of the way in which all of these discourses filter into public debate, specifically that which is facilitated through the media, and try and bring it back, given that we now have a broader intellectual discursive context for how it happens, to talk specifically about the media. And for further reflections, I'm going to introduce Karima Brown, who started her career as a senior producer at the SABC, the public broadcaster, perhaps something we haven't spoken enough about, and it might be a topic for a future seminar. But who was also then political editor at Business Day, and executive editor at the Independent Group, and now an analyst, journalist, and commentator at large, but also appearing on ENCA. So, of course, there's a depth of experience here, and she herself has been embroiled in debates about the role of the media in a democracy and the way in which they facilitate public debate, having played these senior roles in the media. So, Karima, over to you. And unfortunately, I have to leave, so my colleague, Dr. Iva Sarakinski, thankfully we maintain the partnership from the Wits School of Government, will continue chairing. So, thanks everyone, and thanks, Karima.
Hi, good evening. I can't possibly follow up on Angelo's intellectual and theoretical base and framework to contextualize the debate, hopefully, that we're going to be having a little later on. What I'd just like to reflect on is perhaps just my understanding of public debate and the role of journalism as I see it, as someone who's worked in this industry for about 20 odd or so years. So let me say off the bat, I don't believe that there is any objective news. I don't believe in objectivity at all. There is no news that is valueless, that is without interest. We come at the world as journalists with a worldview. It is reflected in every single story we write. I have no desire to be objective. What I want to do as a journalist is to be fair, to be balanced, and to be accurate, and to create a context in which what I write is digested and understood. I don't presume that the audience for whom I write agrees with what I say, but I don't hide my politics. In fact, my politics informs my journalism. It always has, and it always will. For me, journalism is about change, changing society, providing a platform for those who are not voiceless, but who many choose not to hear. For me, journalism is about confronting power, exposing what power does in society. And I mean all power. I don't just mean political power. I mean corporate power, the power of elites, the power of organized religions, the power of patriarchy, the power of corporations. So I'm not in the business of hiding my politics from my journalism. Like I said, if anything, it actually informs it. And of course, in South Africa, that's not one, generally how it's done, and two, you get severely punished for it. I have, on occasion, been severely punished for having a political view and having a world view. I think that it's very foolish to think that society is not consistently contested. The battle for ideas is a contested terrain, and journalism functions within that contestation. Society is a society of contradictions. In South Africa, those fundamental contradictions are essentially the intersection between class, race, and gender, and a whole range of other important fissures in society. But for me, those three divisions are what informs my worldview. I am a leftist. I look at the world from that perspective. That doesn't mean that I have to write untruths about people whose political perspective I happen to share. It doesn't mean that I can't critique a politician whose position on free education I happen to share the same view of. And I think in South Africa we're often quite infantile in that way. We think that because people hold the same world outlook, that if you are a journalist, you are then unable to hold a politician or someone who holds public office or who represents some kind of formal interest, that you can't hold that person to account. And I think that is probably some of the big, I think, sets of immaturities, I'd like to call them, in the South African media. I was one of the journalists during the Thabo Mbeki era who was gagged at the SABC by Dr. Snukisi Galala because I was too critical of President Mbeki's policies and positions. In the course of following the current president, President Zuma's campaign within the ANC, I have often been accused of not only helping to bring down President Mbeki, which is like a really weird thing for a journalist to be able to do, but be that as it may, that not only did I help the Zuma administration come to power, I also made consistent apologies for it. Because I think I was probably one of the few political editors at the time who factually reported that he was going to win in the African National Congress at a time when the entire country wrote what they felt rather than what they were seeing. And of course, now I am again banned at the SABC because I'm critical of President Jacob Zuma. And of course, I was taken to the Ombudsman by Helen Ziller because I wore an ANC hat at a January 8th rally in, I think, 2 or 3 Januaries ago. And when I was at Business Day, I co-wrote a story with someone who's been my writing partner for many years, Fugani Mde, about a dressing down that President Thabo Mbeki apparently received at an NEC meeting of the ANC. And whilst he did receive that dressing down, we placed him in the meeting, and we were wrong. He was actually on holiday. So our source lied to us. And my editor at the time used the front page for 2 days to apologize about our mistake. So what I'd like to end off with is that there's nothing wrong with making a mistake. I don't think there's a journalist alive who's worth his or her salt who hasn't made a mistake. We all make mistakes. It's our response to those mistakes that define us and that gives us an indication of whether we're committed to seeking the truth. And part of what I felt was particularly problematic about HuffPost South Africa was its response when it found out that it had in fact dropped all the balls in terms of editorial ethics and checks and balances. It was its response to having been told by someone else, by the way, that they had made a fundamental mistake. And so I don't have a problem with people making mistakes or journalists making mistakes. I have a problem with hiding the mistake on page 10 in 2 little sentences. But I also don't have a problem for someone to say that they are a neoliberal. They believe in capitalism. I don't believe in capitalism. But that doesn't mean I can't read your story about whether we're spending our health budget correctly or not. or be compelled to understand your argument. So I think there's a whole range of things that we need to grow up about in the South African media, really quick and really fast. The reason why that is so is because our profession is actually under threat. And it's under threat from its traditional centers, which is organized power, political power, but it's also under threat from corporates and from technology. I've never seen so many journalists unemployed in my life. And that's because someone who has a phone can now tell you about the collapse of a building or a terrorist act faster than you can get there. Or perhaps because you can't get there, because if you at the SABC, there's no petrol to put in the car for you to actually go to the story. Or if you're at business day during the financial crisis, that you have to phone your friend and sleep in a Zozo whilst you go and cover the formation of Coke, because business day had invested badly and couldn't send journalists to the Free State. So those are the realities of our professions and our jobs. And the fact that in South Africa, more so than probably anywhere else, I think that we need to get away from this idea that we're involved in bringing people news objectively and without our own worldview. Thanks.
Let me start by thanking the three panelists for their time and presentations. The lights on should be working. Oh, there we go. Let me start by thanking the three panelists for their time and their presentations. Very challenging presentations, quite controversial in terms of putting positions out there quite bluntly in some ways. So that should stimulate some nice discussion. So normally chairs of these panels abuse their privilege and dominate the discussion by asking 10 questions before everyone else gets a chance to speak. I see good reason to deviate from that trend. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to try and get the panelists to argue against each other first, before we take rounds of questions from the audience. And we'll do that in rounds of 3, and then we'll give the panelists a short opportunity to respond to batches of 3 questions and deal with all the issues that have come up. So in instigating a dialogue between the 3 panelists, we've got very diverse positions. We've got the first position, which is essentially saying the ability to engage in argument is so closed that one has to engage in subversive acts to open up a space for a discussion of issues, irrespective of the truth or falsity of the issues, but just to even create a space to have a discussion about issues. Second panelist takes a broader philosophical view about what it means to have a discussion where people can share ideas and engage and mutually understand each other. And the third position, perhaps the most controversial one, is saying, here's my position up front, I don't apologize for it, it doesn't impact on my ability to tell a story. So is that a quest for truth with a capital T, or is it a quest for a truth with a small t, a particular truth, rather than a general truth? Now, all of these issues have massive implications for public debate, because if we're looking for small truths, we're fighting our corners. If we're looking for big truths, we're trying to find a common sense of inclusivity in terms of a shared narrative that gathers momentum over time, that has a societal impact. So very, very different positions. And let me start off by saying to Marius, would you like to put some short questions to your co-panelists?
I don't have any questions, but I do have there's a comment to, don't have any questions, but I just do have a comment to Karima. Well, I have to say, initially when that whole ANC thing came out, I did disagree with it, but my position has changed now, and I think it's changed a lot. And I think you are correct to set up your stall and say where you are, where you sit politically, who you support. And I think that actually is better for journalism. And I mean, this obviously doesn't affect your journalism, because when you write Business Star, I really used to enjoy reading your column. So obviously, I may not agree with you politically, but that doesn't affect you, your talent, or whatever it is as a journalist. So I think your view is actually the one that should, or your way of being open about your politics is better for journalism in South Africa, and what should happen more, actually.
Andrew, if you could put a question to the two panelists, and then we'll have a conversation.
So my question to both the panelists, who've now said that it's better to have the politics visible, is what do we mean by politics? Because I think it's one thing to say that my politics are visible. I'm a feminist, I'm anti-racist, I'm anti-nationalist, and I'm post-humanist or humanist, or whatever your politics happen to be. That's for me one thing, which is politics in the sense of matters for the polity. And I think in South Africa too often we conflate matters of the polity with politics in its meaning as political party matters. And for me those are very different things. And I think Karima I don't hear it in this way. I hear that there is a politics beyond the party politics. And my question would be, what is the relationship then between conflicts between those larger questions of matters of the polity and matters of the political party that one publicly then supports? My question to Marius is a question of, it's not really a question of intent, but the idea of trying to prove a point about the political economy of journalism in South Africa by what I can only think of as a kind of satirical act. My question is, where does because it reminded me of a scene in The Wings of the Dove where the protagonist's antagonist, the man, says, I don't believe in anything I write, I'm thoroughly insincere. And I don't have such a relationship with writing, because for me writing is far more work and it's far more investment of one's soul, one's mind and one's being into the act of writing, to be writing things I don't really believe. So the question is, what is your relationship with the content of what it is that you wrote in relation to the project that you then afterwards announced is what you were doing, in relation to your understanding of journalism? Because if this is only about showing up a system, what led you to choose this route as opposed to a series of other routes which may have been far more productive, not just for the problem that you were identifying, but for yourself as an actor in that particular process?
Okay, so I've had quite a few journalists ask me, including my contemporaries at other newspapers when I was at Independent, can I confirm if I'm a member of the African National Congress? And I always laugh at it. I think the last person was Paul Viciato. I think he's now at Bloomberg. But he was writing at the time a series of articles about the ownership structure of independent media, because it had been bought from the Irish. And so the narrative that everyone sought to confirm was that the paper was effectively an ANC mouthpiece. So I had to answer questions about my party membership ever so often. And of course, when I was in the stadium with the ANC hat on, everybody assumed that I was a member of the ANC. I haven't been a member of the ANC since it has been unbanned. I was a member of the ANC when it was banned, when I was recruited into the underground when I was a teenager. When I became a journalist, I took a decision not to be a member of a political party. So that's the factual position. I'm also not a member of the South African Communist Party, although I was recruited into its underground structures as well. My political philosophy and my orientation is broadly what we defined back then as Charterist or Congress, which is a political orientation that stems from the populist movement, that centers around the alliances of the the congresses, which is the African National Congress, the Colored People's Congress, the Indian Congresses, and then of course also the Congress of Democrats. When those were banned later on, of course there was the ANC and South African Communist Party and SACU at the time, later of course to become COSATU. In my youth is mass democratic movement, UDF and so on. So that's my world outlook, or rather my organizational manifestation of my politics. Does that mean that I can't report on the ANC factually? I don't think so. I think in some instances it probably gives me a unique understanding of the inner workings of the organization and a lot of the policies. I think I'm also able to differentiate between holding a broad ideological and global outlook to agreeing or having to feel obliged to report as if I am a deployed cadre person in service of that party when I'm in a media house or in a media organization. I think if the kinds of stories that I've written and that I've done, I think has actually made it easier for people to understand the ANC, more so than promote the ANC. And so I don't see myself as an extension of being an organizational functionary in a media house for a political party. What I do see is having to contest what I would term mainstream media, which is why I've always historically been involved in media projects that push back against the traditional mainstream media organizations that we found in apartheid South Africa and that we found in the post-1994 arrangement, where people's politics would slip in by sleight of hand. You'd have to read between the lines to get a sense of whether someone is actually in favor of a particular thing or not. It would never be upfront, it would never be declared. It would always kind of be as a little subtext. But what it definitely was in many instances almost oppositional to the new order. So when I, for example, went to the SABC just after the first elections, we hadn't had the first democratic local government elections. Part of my job there was to assist the SABC in beginning to communicate to the community whom they always broadcasted at rather than for and with. So my understanding of carrying my politics as part of my journalism isn't in aid of a political party per se, even though I share perhaps its orientation and its philosophy and outlook.
Thanks. I just want to make a point with Angelo's point about political parties and so on. I think we can define people's politics into crunchy and soft politics, if I can use those terms. So your politics are soft if you say you're a liberal or you're a socialist, but for example. But I think they're crunchy if you come and say I support the DA or the EFF or the ANC. And I think that's just, don't really know where I'm going with that, but just something came to mind. And with regard to why I did the whole Huffington Post thing, I was just seeing a lot of stuff in the media I didn't agree with. And I thought, what is the most ridiculous thing I can write? And it was taking the vote away from white men. And I never thought it would get published. I didn't think it would go as big as it did. And I think it was also a case of being a bit bored and just seeing what would happen. But in hindsight, there are definitely things I would have done differently. But hindsight's you have 20/20 vision of hindsight, so it's easy to say now. But I do think I proved my point spectacularly. But I did do some things in hindsight. I would have done some things differently, I think.
Because then I feel like I'm bracketing this, and I'd like the audience to start.
Okay, so we've got some wonderful positions that are laid out, and let's see how people in the audience engage and respond to the ideas put out there. So let's have groups of 3 questions, and first hand up gets the first question.
My question is for Angelo. If we're talking about people being explicit about their political affiliations, let's talk about it as ideological positions, whether they're social conservatives or libertarians or communists. Is it important that we have a variety of those views expressed in the press? So are you comfortable with people that want to call for an end-to-gay marriage or bring back the death penalty or say that there should be no property rights? Should all of those views be expressed in the marketplace of ideas? Or should there be some sort of narrowing of that? Is there some sort of ideological positions that are unacceptable in our democracy?
Good evening, I'm Stephen Sack. So I'm curious about whether anybody's written on where fake news is thought to have begun. I worked in the civil service for a few years in a national department. My theory is that fake news happens in state bureaucracies. That's actually where it begins, because I remember when the SABC had a huge fallout when Peter McLeod was the head of the SABC. And I remember that the findings, nobody was found to be, in contravention. And you just had a sense that as the issues unfolded, everybody just threw shit all over the place in order to confuse everybody, and you can never arrive at the truth. And that was my experience of being a civil servant as well. You would deliver programs, and you would know that somebody on the ground would get the ear of your political head and just fabricate extraordinary nonsense, which you could never, ever really contest. So I don't know if I'm right, but it just seems it's so embedded in state bureaucracy, and then it sort of flows out in the mouths of politicians. So I'm just curious if anybody's written on that.
Yeah, hi. My question is also for Angelo. After a very, very interesting presentation, during which you flagged for us the multiple sites through which and within which debates may happen, including church, family, media. It really is fascinating then to ask ourselves, in all these spaces debates happen, so how and when do we recognize that an issue has become, what is public debate in that context? What becomes public debate, and how and when do we recognize it, right? So because it happens across this multiplicity of spaces, we then have to have some kind of sense of when an issue becomes public, as in an issue worth debating, right? And so my sense is I'd like to have an insight into how you think issues, concerns, and problems become public in a context particularly like South Africa, which is very, very contested, and taking into account your call to move away from a position of fixity in history, right? So I'm just curious.
So here we've got 3 questions, and let's quickly give each of the 3 panelists an opportunity to present some comment on those questions.
I facilitated a discussion for the IAJ on whether racism rather should be criminalized. And the conclusion of that panel at that time, I think they were busy compiling a book, was that it shouldn't be. I think that for me, the proliferation of various news organizations, different ownership structures, and people's ability to access as many sources of information as possible is probably the only safeguard that the society has. Because what that does is that it puts in the hands of people who consume news the power to make the decision, and not the other way around. So those old 1960, 1970 theories of mass communication where you can just kind of, influence people as if they have no agency, as if they can't interact with what is coming at them, is nonsense. I mean, the South African apartheid regime had a strategy of a total onslaught with a media machine, that was amazing. I mean, the Citizen was born, etc., etc. And yet the majority of South Africans didn't believe a word of it, right? Which means that even in repressive situations, people have the ability to distinguish between a truth and a lie. And so in a democracy, technically, it should be even easier. The problem, however, is the question around the origination of fake news, the question that the gentleman over there raised. As we were talking, we have a situation now in real time with the entire state capture thing. I just want to quickly tell you what we're dealing with, what I'm trying to figure out as I'm sitting here, because I have to report on it tomorrow. So 2 weeks ago, the Sunday Times reported that the new finance minister has kicked the Denal Asia deal that has links to the Guptas to the curb, that they're not doing it anymore. Today, Denal appears in Parliament in front of the Public Enterprises Committee. The Citizen is running the stories, quoting the chairperson of Denal saying that is fake news that the Sunday Times ran, and that they did meet with the minister, but that there's going to be an amicable solution and that the deal is going to go ahead. Now, we are in a democracy. We're not under apartheid anymore. The Sunday Times is not ANN7. And the Citizen is no longer the Citizen of, Corne Mulder, whichever Mulder it was that started it. And I'm trying to get from my Shlomi, what the hell is going on? Did they meet? Didn't they meet? You'll be surprised to see what he's just sent me on my phone. And the truth of the matter is that that's going to occupy us now for the next couple of days and weeks. And for me, in the context of state capture, the first things to worry about in a society is when citizens are unable to tell the truth from a lie. And for me, the discussion around fake news, like I said, is not an academic one. It's not, oh no, that one's lying. It's what is the intention of the lie? What is the intention of the misinformation? And in the case of what we see here, it is the dislodging of a constitutional order to be replaced by a set of shadowy institutions and repurposing state institutions for private lodges. So suddenly, it's not just a joke anymore, trying to make a point. It becomes part of a political project. It becomes part of how powerful people manipulate and use information to get certain desired outcomes.
Karima, which is about the intent. For me, it's also about the consequences of these actions, because they have political consequences. And for me, one of the crucial concerns, I'll take the questions in that order, in all three of these questions, is the question of critical literacy. Because democracy, as a set of guarantees in a framework that structures a state in the way in which it works top down, isn't democracy. If you do not have critically literate citizens, then the democratic project has failed. And in South Africa, with its compromised education systems, plural, can we really expect anything different from what it is we are seeing? And as somebody who was there during what I call the Bengofication, then the Asmanification, followed by the Pandorification of higher education, it was a particularly distressing project because it was like something out of The Lives of Animals by J.M. Coetzee. Don't ask what is the nature of this penal colony. Ask yourself, as the captured chimpanzee, How do I use this stick to get those bananas that are being moved further and further away from the cage with more and more complicated impediments to your getting to the bananas? Because you're so busy thinking about your own survival in the system by following what do I do to get the bananas, you don't pause to think, but this is a penal colony. Who's running this penal colony? What kind of sick games are they playing with food? Right? You're just hungry, so you want bananas. And so many of us in the post-94 settlement are after those bananas. It's about status and status anxiety. I want to have this job, I want to drive that car, this material projection of success. So for me, that critical literacy component is crucial in your question, because it isn't for me about a declaration of position. I mean, one of the most banal things that opens so many academic treatises, so many, as a feminist, I would like, no. If you're a feminist, I will be able to tell that in the first paragraph that you are doing feminist analysis. You don't need to tell me that this is what you are doing. Right? But it's this kind of display without the substance, because people take the label without having done the work. With 35 years of reading feminist theory, I don't go around saying, as a feminist man, because I know that that gesture would be one, hollow, two, counterproductive, and three, would actually be the kind of thing that no self-respecting feminist would ever do, because you know that what you're doing is silencing critique and not engaging in a conversation where you want to learn. So for me, it's not a declaration of position. I'm not interested in, I would like the person to know what their position is, and in their writing, reveal that that is their politics, not their position. But their politics, their belief systems, their worldviews must be clear rather than obscure, and not pretending. So don't pretend to be progressive when actually you're progressive, because a critical literate reader is going to spot it, because they're going to be concepts that you are not in command of, that in your writing I will see this, what are you doing here? Right? But I'm an exception to the rule, and that's not a boast, but that's a reality. Having gone through the rituals of education that I have, I am not somebody who is a representative of the standard highly educated person in South Africa. But it used to pain me when people would say in the universities that I taught in, we have the cream of the crop. And you go, well, then you have a very sour crop. Because you always imagine that the education crisis is in someone else's school. It's in some rural school in KwaZulu-Natal. It's because kids are learning mathematics literacy under a tree in Limpopo. It is not in the highly, high-costing private school in suburban Johannesburg. Having taught engineering, I can tell you the crisis is in the high-paying suburban school in Johannesburg. So for me, it's not about a marketplace of ideas, but it's far more crucially about the power with which ideas circulate, the institutions in which they circulate, and the materiality of that circulation. So there is no denying that not all ideas circulate with equal power in the society that we live in. That some ideas have greater power. So to go back to that, I grew up in a totalitarian society, there's no doubt about it. But I didn't believe the totalitarian lies because I had precisely those other institutions that countermanded the totalitarian regime's information gain. And I fear that we're sitting in a situation where the Baudrillardian prophecy, which is a terrible prophecy, has come true. We will come to an age in which there is more and more information and less meaning. Because for me, there's a reason the rituals of journalism were what they were. People see it as gatekeeping, but it's also about editorial processing. It's about making decisions based on news values, based precisely on the kind of politics that you're talking about, with a project in mind to inform with the purpose of getting people to understand something. And they may not agree with what it is you're doing. That was the purpose of the op-ed, right? It's where the newspaper could publish some point of view, but didn't really. It was a kind of steam valve. This is where you put your communist, your socialist, your feminist, but you're a practical organization that is into numbers, and your reader would read this and go, see, I'm being exposed to a variety of ideas. It was not just published opposite the editorial, it was also opposing the editorial, going, look at us, we're so open-minded, we're publishing a variety of views. But that variety of views must still pass the tests of logic. So I'm not averse to reading an opinion or a journalistic piece or an analysis of the economy in The Economist or wherever, in some space that is deeply invested in the perpetuation of capitalism, if it passes the internal logic tests that we ask of anything else. But if it is merely this counterfactual rant, how can you say this is the most unequal society on the planet? Well, if you're going to start from that premise, you're denying data. And I'm no positivist, I don't sacrifice children at the altar of positivism, but we can't pretend this isn't an unequal society at the level of experience and at the level of data generation. So the marketplace of ideas isn't for me a marketplace. It is a space in which there's contestation of some ideas and others are entirely dismissed. During the 2015 student uprisings in this country, the idea of anarchy by people who should have known better, people with higher degrees in political science, became the commonsensical definition of anarchy as lawlessness and vulgar people who trash things. You're like, I'm sorry, you teach politics in a university that pretends it has standards. This is your definition of anarchy? Then you would sit in panels and people would confront you with straw tiger arguments. So are you in support of violence? Wherever it is, so we become projectors, we project onto other people ideas that they don't actually possess. Because constant misunderstanding in the service of some political agenda, rather than listening to one another and seeing whether what that person says passes the rational standard and interrogating what they articulated as their position, rather than what I imagine their position to be, is one of the crucial issues for me. Where did fake news begin? Precisely in that critical illiteracy moment. And here I would think of Chomsky and Herman and their avatars, the people who've written in the 2 decades since. If we're simply taking the state's definition and the state's version of what had happened, and we never do the interrogation of the numbers, so we simply represent it, that's fake news. So we say that there was collateral damage in the bombing of Baghdad. We don't interrogate that that means that 500 Iraqi children died in that particular bombing raid. We take the words and the terms of the state. In this country, the term xenophobia became the same kind of, no, it's not xenophobia, it's Afrophobia. And I saw one intellectual after another roll over and play patsy to this debate about Afrophobia. That's like, who determines these terms? Just because a minister of state has said this doesn't mean that's the term that you should use. So tomorrow when the minister says the division sign is no longer the division sign, we all roll over and play that game. Wait, we know what that society looks like. It ran in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and it ran in apartheid South Africa for a very long time. Why would we want to do this? And so it's the same phenomenon when people start using that Population Registration Act, or when they say the sex of this athlete. You go, I'm sorry, or these female runners. You're lazy and stupid. Having gone through the Caster Semenya phenomenon, why are we not calling them women runners? You don't know if they're female, and if you don't know the difference between women and female, why are you writing? You're one, not careful with words, and two, you're ignorant. Why am I reading you? Right? So I disengage. And the same with when people say, this white squatter camp, and you go, what makes this a white squatter camp? Or all the, firstly, why is it a squatter camp? Why isn't it an informal settlement? Why is it, what do you mean it's a squatter camp? These people are not squatting. They're living in particular kinds of dwellings, but it turns out that this isn't somebody else's land. They're not squatting in the sense of what the word squat means. So fake news for me has its origins in people not doing the necessary work of following up on the truth value of what is being said to them, whether it's by a corporation or a government. And there's a much longer history of accepting corporations' versions and not questioning them, and that's ongoing. But the opposite of that is not for me a radical and continuous skepticism, which is a kind of Twin Peaks, what is the other thing with Scully and Mulder? X-Files. The truth is out there, but everything is a lie. This is not Jim Carrey stuck in some alternative reality. This is not, if you took the wrong pill, you're in the wrong version of the Matrix. Because radical skepticism isn't in itself productive of political behavior, but is progressive towards the realization of greater freedom or greater rights of people. Radical skepticism can very easily become cynicism, where you're just posturing. Oh, I don't believe this. And any 4-year-old can play that game. Those of us who've had 4-year-olds will tell you, I don't believe you. It's a very standard response from a 4 to 5-year-old. It's bedtime. I don't believe you. Radical skepticism, but no productive outcome. As for the sites of the debate, precisely there isn't one public debate. There are multiple publics. And some of us operate between those various publics. And my concern in South Africa is that there is a push, not just by political parties, but by very many other people, to have one public debate where we all agree. And I'm here with Kunagola on this position of difference. If we differ, we must agree to the meanings of those differences. Because if we don't agree on the meanings of those differences, we are not going to be able to have that discussion. Because I can debate with somebody who's got a radically different viewpoint from mine. If we can agree that we're going to use logic, that we're going to follow the precepts of argumentation based on evidence, and we're not just going to make polemical statements or become ad hominem or ad feminam in our attacks, because that's where South Africans usually go. Oh, it's because you're a communist. No, you don't. I'm not a communist. Oh, it's because you advocate violence. It becomes name-calling. You're just a neoliberal. Well, nothing that what person has said in the first 5 minutes of that discussion, it has anything to do with neoliberalism. They're simply blood cudgels that we use to sort of beat one another up. And it's precisely in the interactions between those that you can begin to say to people, we can have debates, plural, and many of your beliefs don't have to inform every act of your argumentation. Because we've all been also in those spaces, and I'll end here, where the debate or the discussion is about women's rights. And somebody will get up and go, but you're leaving out racism. So because I haven't spoken about racism in this particular focus doesn't mean I've left it out. But if people listen carefully, they will hear that the person is actually talking about class and its intersection with gender, sexuality and its intersection with gender. Instead of, I'm waiting for the person to stop talking, for their lips to stop moving, so that I can intersect like a good soap opera actress, my version of what it is they should have said to me. And that for me is not debate. That's simply two shouting matches going nowhere. In a debate space, one also listens. And it's the listening that is part of the critical citizenship and critical literacy that's very much missing in South Africa.
Thanks for those responses, getting to the nub of difficult conceptual issues around what public debate is. So let's take another round and focusing on the left for the moment, because the right got a lot of time.
Hello, my name is Kate Wilkinson. I'm a researcher at Africa Check, which is based in the Wits Journalism Department. And I would just like to make more of a comment than a question, really, just around the discussion of what fake news is and where it came from. I think currently, if you look at the global sort of media take on fake news, it has most recently been rooted in the production of false information for monetary value. And we've seen that in websites which create sensational stories to drive clicks to make money. And I think that it's a bit of a laziness for us to just take that term with fake news and apply it to all these other incidences, which I think have very different intents, like Karima said, but also have different reasons for being and need different solutions and different approaches. What Marius Roodt did is very different to the misinformation we're getting about Denel. Misreporting in a newspaper is described as fake news, but it's very different from a website that's trying to drive clicks. And I think that we need to interrogate what's happening rather than just use a blanket term to describe it, because it lets people off the hook for some very serious violations. Propaganda is not fake news. Misinformation is not fake news. And we need those biting words aimed at the people who are doing those very, very bad things so that they feel the sting and so that the public realizes what transgressions they actually are. And I also think my last point is that the term fake news has become a bit of a joke and a slur. Yeah. It's what we say to someone when we don't like or agree with what they said. It's what we post as a comment on Facebook when we disagree with something, whether it be a story from the New Age or from the Mail and Guardian. So I think we need to work harder to come up with better terms and interrogate the way that we present them to the public and in the media at large.
In terms of time constraints, I'm going to beg your indulgence to make shorter interventions and shorter questions, and we're going to pass the mic around, and then the panelists will give a final set of responses, because we don't want everyone to get home too late and have cold supper.
Thank you very much. My quick question is going to start from this premise that who pays the piper calls the tune. I think Karima said very well that there is no objective news. My quick question then is, sometimes I think the media tends to play us some cards here and pretend that when the state, for instance, is trying to project certain views, that is categorized as propaganda or propagandists. And when they are also promoting their views in a way, it is something that must be taken as objective. So I think if we stand by the premise that there is no objectivity, let whatever interest be promoted freely in that direction, and we avoid trying to rein each other.
Hi, my name is Faisal. I'm an avid consumer of news. It's part of my job as well. Marius, so when I first read an article of yours, I knew immediately as a seasoned reader and a consumer that it was nonsense. I'm not too sure how something like Huffington Hoax would actually publish such nonsense. Angelo, you seem to have said it all. Karima, yeah. I'm of the view that your politics should actually stay out of your journalism. Leave it up to the reader after providing all the facts. You can give your nuance as to how you slightly believe the story should go, but leave it up to the reader or to the listener, where you so evidently speaking on these days on certain media channels. I would like to talk about this particular channel that you talk on, either early in the morning or on a Sunday evening. I don't know if people in the audience understand the history of Prime Media, and especially 702. I think it was quite instrumental pre-1994 in terms of positioning the debate, especially in middle-class South Africa, as to where the politics of the country is going. In fact, people would, the whole talk format on radio, I believe, was pioneered by 702. A certain John Robbie, he's left the station now, he was actually a host from about, I think, 10 o'clock at night. And the radio the show used to probably go until about midnight, but it was fiery. It was left, right, whatever your viewpoint was. But unfortunately, I find in post-1994 what has happened with the Broadcasting Acts and whatever it is, seemingly giving many people freedoms to actually broadcast what it is that they want to, etc. The space for diverse opinions has been constrained very much in a Prime Media space, especially, Karima, I will take an example of your show on the Sunday evening. You occupy the space. You don't allow anybody else to actually interact with you. It's your view and your view only. And I don't believe in a democratic system that should actually be the actual way to go. And the other point also is your station, or the station you speak on, has this process of sanitizing any caller that actually comes in on the actual station. You want to express a different point of view. They will profile you, via these call screeners and that. They will profile you and will frustrate you to actually come onto the station. They will actually do their darndest to actually censor your viewpoint. And I think that is critical, and that is what I believe is actually guiding the public discussion and radicalizing people into different camps as well. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Because we want to hear as many voices as possible in the short time left, could we have short questions and short statements, please?
Hi, I'm Kate Pereira. I'm a freelance journalist. And I just wanted to put a point to Marius and to ask him to respond to something. I'm afraid it is quite a pointed point. I've tried to figure out how to say this softer, but I can't right now. But I am interested in your response. And that is that there are means of engaging with things that we see in the news that we disagree with or that we dislike. Every single day I encounter things that I think that opinion is offensive or that fact is easily contestable. And it might be very old school, but I do write letters to the editor. And if I can't get through in that forum, I might go to a thought leader on Mail and Guardian to put an alternative position out there. It's not a sexy way of doing it. I don't get a lot of attention if I disagree with that. But it is a means that's available to you and me. And I'm just wondering if the way that you chose, with hindsight, do you not think it comes off a little bit like like an extended trolling that you did?
Again, can I ask for short statements and short questions?
Thank you. My question will be very short. My question goes to Marius. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. I hope I'm saying it correctly. You said something about the need of the white people to do some or have some introspection. My question would be, what type of introspection are you speaking about? Do you mean that they must decolonize themselves, or they must? What do you mean? What is it? What is this introspection? I'll appreciate if you elaborate on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more?
I'm going to try to be brief. The issue of race. I think Karima did speak about her whole background, coming from multiracial kind of things that you were involved with. And Angelo's been speaking about against that kind of thinking, population registration. And this is what's missing in the media, is that the whole notion of Ubuntu and the whole notion of African humanism, that we're just human. We're not Indian, we're not colored. If you could just say something about that,
I take it that that's the last intervention from the audience. So let me hand over to the panelists for a final response.
Thank you. Just on Kate's point about fake news, what I agree, I think it's becoming very dangerous. We saw even Donald Trump tweeted a little while ago to the New York Times. They reported on a story, and he tweeted that the New York Times was fake news, which I think is very dangerous. I mean, it's obviously dismissing out of hand what the New York Times was reporting on, and who knows what kind of thoughts Donald Trump supporters would have had then about New York Times and what was reporting about Donald Trump. I think that also creates a bit of an echo chamber, because then people also only stick to the news that they agree with, which creates a false view of the world. And also I think it's part of the point was made earlier, that we're in a society with much more information, or much more news, but much less information. And then, sorry, I forgot your name, but the point about the letter to the editor, I've done myself, wrote a couple of letters to Business Day, outraged from Benoni or whatever the case is. But I agree with you. I mean, as I said earlier, in hindsight, there are things I could have done differently. I think what I did open up a debate that's needed in South Africa, but things could have been done differently. And there was quite a lot of collateral damage, in the real sense of the term, I think, after the whole event. So, I mean, I don't regret my actions, but I do think I could have done them differently, and could have followed up possibly a bit differently. And with regard to introspection of white people, I don't think we need to decolonize ourselves or anything like that. But I think a lot of white people don't accept their place of, or they don't reflect on their place of privilege in society, and in South African society. And obviously, I mean, we need to reflect that for a lot of white people, we're in the position we are because of the history of this country. And also, I mean, it's, the way some people still talk about other population groups, for example, in this country, I think it's also part of Angelo's point about the Population Registration Act. People are still stuck in those ways of thinking. And I think white people, because of our history, we need to break out of those ways of thinking and just realize that we do have maybe a different role to play in this country. We're still South Africans, but I think we do need to just be introspective of our place and our privilege.
Okay, so I think of the term fake news the way I think of the term sapiosexual. It has no social science veracity. So I don't use it in an analytical sense, I use it in that ironic distance regard. I mean, people are talking about this and now you have to talk about it, but actually, because Pravda in the USSR, its name in Russian is truth, but it actually wasn't presenting truth, it was faking the news all the time. But we can easily see that about totalitarian societies that we are absent from. And I think it's time for us to take a very deep look into our own society and many of the things that we think of as news, stock price indexes, the value of the rand and its trade exchange with other currencies. What do people make of that? In other words, what is its meaningful component? Why is it at the end of every news broadcast on radio? The rand is, trading against the dollar at value X, but we don't know what it trades against the pula. And at some level, we know that the majority of tourists who come to South Africa are from the rest of the continent. Right? So that's revealing, I think, of the kind of where our priorities are. And that's the kind of decolonializing or decolonizing that I think is important here. Because this isn't just about undoing the past, it's unthinking the rituals by which we learned the past. So for example, on the race question, Karima and I actually share much of that background. So mine is that much of that thinking in the 80s, because and this is not a slight on Karima, but I'm younger than she is, so I came to it slightly later, was precisely the kind of anti-racist work that was being done in the spaces that I was in awareness programs in UDF-funded spaces and UDF-structured spaces. So I could understand that actually the entire notion of the tricameral parliament, the race classifications of education for the later part of South Africa, had no legitimacy because they didn't describe the reality. They created a reality instead of describing it. So for me, this question of moving beyond the categories is not to move beyond the consequences of those categories because they exist. Who has money? Who has wealth? Who gets to speak? Who gets to feel uneasy because the representations of themselves in the media are things they're uncomfortable with? Like Kate, every day I've lived in this country for the last, ever many years, in the 1990s, with uncomfortable, discomforting, and fake, false representations of people like me. But that's what you live with, and you negotiate this all the time. Women do this in a society that's geared against them every day. Why do we have a special category of people who believe that their version of reality ought to be in representation as they want it to be? And when it isn't, the entire system must be brought down. Only when they have it. What do they think the rest of us have been doing for the last 45 years of our lives, other than to bring down the system? And that's the problem with whiteness as a discourse. Touch it on its studio, and suddenly the system must fail. But it isn't interested in joining the rest of the society that's been fighting the system as it is. Women, homosexual men and women, working class people, non-South Africans who live here, people from religions that are demonized in the press in all sorts of ways. Nobody ever goes there, right? Because it's only when I touch on my studio that suddenly my agenda must become the agenda. And thereby whiteness becomes the space of still Europe, no longer European, not yet African. Because that's the powerful insight. And again, this is about literacy, because again, people get to writing before they come to reading. If you want to write about a topic, read up about it. For God's sake, really, because the rest of us have had to do this precisely because we don't have this ability to just insert our voice into the public domain and be taken seriously. Because we're asked to show our receipts. Who pays the piper calls the tune? I wish to slightly disagree with that, because I don't think that the piper is as powerful as you imagine he is. I've worked in several universities in this country where the piper calls the tune, and the rest of us don't play along. Because the piper in that tune calling is the state. It's not the vice-chancellor. The government subsidizes universities that are public in this country, and yet the government hasn't successfully been able to tell us what to teach, how to teach, who to teach, and under what circumstances. So in corporate spaces, again, and I'm going to finish here, there's this imagination that because somebody pays your salary, they can tell you exactly what to do every minute of the day from day to day. That's not how journalism works. And I've worked with journalists, that's not how it happens. There isn't a conspiracy meeting every morning, like it is at the beginning of CHIPS in 1978, where the captain of the police force tells you which crimes you're going to solve, how you're going to solve them, and who you're going to bring in. It doesn't have that kind of uniformity, and people don't play in that way. People undermine systems all the time. They pretend to do one thing and do another, and because the system is so complicated, you can't have the amount of control, as we see from the public broadcaster itself, that try to impose this control on people. You can't do it. The idea of running a world by conspiracy is just not materially possible. Let whatever interest be promoted. Actually, some interests are more powerful than others. If you are the government of this particular country and you have some amount of editorial control over the public broadcaster with its powerful means to go across this country with its many bureaus and cover news in particular ways, you have much more power than a regional radio station or a community radio station. Your narrative, your resources, very different. So to me, it's not just about letting all these stories out there and in a marketplace of equality they interact with one another. Some of those interests come with much more power. Some of them come with corporate power. Conformity in a society with a weak social fabric is a real concern here. Because why do people conform? It's often because there's a very weak social fabric. So to fit in is to have a sense of belonging. I am this kind of supporter of this kind of football team. And all members of other football team supporters are my enemy. And often in the level of ideas, the same happens. And the responsibility of taking voice in public, I think we need to take that seriously. If I step out into public, whether as in this space, I need to take responsibility for my words. I need to think very carefully about how I frame what I say, because words have consequences politically. And too often we go, oh, I didn't mean that. That's not good enough. You chose to come into a space like I did. You spoke. And you need to be held accountable by the words you've used to describe the world as it is. And by all means, that challenge should be respectful, but I should be able to defend why I chose the words I did. And too often, ministers of government, public officials, corporate officials say things and they go, well, I was quoted out of context. We all go, oh, yeah, no, it's a translation problem. If it was a translation problem, there are 11 official languages in this country. You could have spoken in any one of them that you feel comfortable in. And it is the business of the rest of us to get the translation going. So if you're more comfortable in Sepedi, by all means speak in Sepedi. And it is my duty as a citizen who thinks of himself as critically literate to learn enough Sepedi to follow, and where I stop following to get a translation. And I don't have to go with some Kalyankis. I can have other translators translate for me. Because if I live in this society, in Johannesburg, and I know no mother tongue speakers of Sepedi, where have I lived? If I live in this society and I have no access to any Nguni language by way of greeting, thank you, and following the basics, where have I lived? That's the process of decolonizing. It's beginning to learn the languages, rituals, beliefs, and systems of the people whom you live among, not the people who live in London. And I say that in that particular English because it is not about the inflections of the language in which you speak. It is about how you use your space in a particular moment in time, in a particular space, to become one with that space. No longer European, but African. You don't have to be, but not yet African. It's been 23 years. There's no reason for us to keep waiting.
I think for me, the most important thing is that context matters. Also in a place like South Africa than in a lot of other places. And I think there's not enough time spent on situating context and unpacking what exactly that means. And I'm going to return to my original point that I made when I made my presentation. For me, journalism isn't just about informing people. It is about agency. It's about the ability to give people information so that they can act. Act to improve their lives, act to entertain themselves, act to empower themselves, but to act. It's not a passive thing that I'm busy with. And that is really, really important for me. Journalism is also about contestation. Society and social forces and classes are constantly contesting. And our journalism reflects that. It's part of it. You can't pretend that you work as a journalist outside of that contestation. There is a battle for ideas in South Africa, in Africa, in the globe. And we are all part of it. The sooner you find your place in it, the more authentically you can do your work as a journalist. It's up to the public to take it or leave it. And I think, I love the idea of a lot of information. But if there's no meaning, it's just that, you know. And eventually we just become tired of it. We have to be able to make meaning. So increasingly for me, journalism is also about getting to meaning. And sometimes meaning can't be given in 140 characters, which is why my brother's sending me a text saying, what is Daily Vox talking about? Why are you talking about your ANC membership? Because there's no context to the tweets. So it's a little bit bizarre. But that's the reality of our jobs as journalists. We are also required to communicate very complex things in very precise language. So it's not impossible. In fact, it ought to make us better. We need to be more precise. We need to use our words carefully. We need to speak with clarity so that we can get to meaning. Thanks.
Well, it always falls on the chair to say something profound at the end of a gathering like this, so I'm going to try my best. There's huge pressure after the contributions of all three panelists. And our colleagues in journalism, I'm sure, have seen many an essay that has begun or concluded with "Speak truth to power." And what we're seeing from this discussion is that it's not as simple as that. There's power in speaking, there's power in establishing the truth, and there's truth and non-truth in power itself. And in all of those complications and in all of the discussions and dissections and analysis of those dimensions, perhaps we get closer to the truth. We might not find it, but hopefully if we do that, we find ourselves in a better place in relation to the truth. So with that, let me conclude. Let me thank the panelists again. Marius, Angelo, and Karima, thank you very much. And on behalf of Abraham Fakir, who had to leave, unfortunately, and ASRI, let me thank you all for coming to attend us, and also to the School of Journalism at Wits for hosting the event. Thanks very much for your efforts in that as well. So again, in conclusion, in wrapping up, thanks very much for participating in a very stimulating discussion on the challenges of public debate, not just in South Africa, but anywhere perhaps. And travel safe home. I'm Bani Gashi.